Thank you, Ann, very much. And Ann, do you have time to stay?
I'll stay.
Okay. Jim Earp is the next presenter, and he's with the California Alliance for Jobs. Thank you for coming, Jim.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the opportunity to spend a few minutes with your committee today. I'm kind of a bookend here. The professor gave you some polling data on the front end, and I've been asked to provide you some information on some more recent research that we've done here in California. As the head of the California Alliance for Jobs, we basically represent 2,000 contractors and about 80,000 union construction workers that do this work all over the state. And there probably isn't an organization in the state that has spent more time, energy over the years to test voter attitudes on transportation funding than we have. We've done it because, for instance, talking about Ann's subject matter, we have spent a lot of time helping counties fashion expenditure plans and figure out how to get those in front of the voters and persuade voters of the need to pass them. In Northern California, that has amounted to over $20 billion worth of sales tax and regional tax measures over the last 10 years or so. On the statewide level, it's been a little different pursuit. We have spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to protect money that is already being collected for transportation. And so that has resulted in about 3 measures over the last 10 years or so, maybe 12 years, to constitutionally protect certain transportation funds so that they are used for the purposes that they were originally intended. But today is a different subject matter. We're talking about how do we put additional funding revenue into a statewide system. That's a big lift, and we've polled it over the years. As you've seen from some of the numbers, voters aren't exactly anxious or excited about the idea of digging in their pocket. They're still feeling the sting of the recent recession. And they don't feel like they have to look around very far to find examples of government's inefficiency and perhaps incompetency in delivering various kinds of programs, whether it be infrastructure or healthcare or whatever. You can name it. They can figure out a reason to criticize it. So it leaves us a little gun shy sometimes. What we wanted to do this last couple of months is augment our research with some focus groups where we could actually have a conversation with a representative group of voters. And I've given you a handout that is a more detailed outline of what we did. I'm not going to cover all of that in the few minutes that I have, but I wanted to touch on some of the key points. We felt the value, you know, I don't get to use my tools very often in the garage. I like to do woodworking once in a while, but I like to have the right tool for the right thing when I do get a chance to do it. And focus groups have a very different purpose than polling, that it allows you to really observe voters in a more of a conversational, problem-solving atmosphere and get a sense for the depth of feeling they have for or against a particular issue, and it gives you an opportunity to kind of drill in and work around the edges and try to get a little bit better sense for why they feel the way they do. You can't always get that in the poll. You get the numbers. You can ask them questions and they can answer yes or no, and then you add it all up. But in a focus group, you get a little bit different quality of information, which can help inform additional polling and research. So that's what we did this last couple of months. We did some focus groups up and down the state, and we had 3 real objectives. We wanted to determine whether voters, whether they even place a high priority on addressing our transportation deficiencies. We wanted, number 2, we wanted to identify which transportation programs are the highest priority in their view. And number 3, we wanted to test the receptivity to several different kinds of funding, transportation funding sources. what we found basically are, number one, that voters are highly aware of the deficiencies of their local and the statewide transportation system. It's very interesting to note that given them an open-ended question at the outset of the focus group, you know, what are the things that we need to really work on in California? What are your biggest concerns? The condition of our roads, both on a local and statewide level, came right out of the gate. This wasn't something they had to be prompted for. It was there. So they recognized that. Then we asked them of that, you know, we tried to drill in what part of it needs addressing the most. And there were two areas that really captured most of their concern and attention. One was that we need to maintain and repair our existing system. You've already seen that in some of the other data that was presented to you. Secondly, they really feel strongly about replacing stuff that's unsafe. Whether it's bridges, whether there's road stretches of road that are recognized as being, you know, hazardous, they want to fix those, and that even bleeds over into you know, places where they want more sidewalks and safe ways for people to move around, even if they're not in their cars. Further down was more transit options and basically making, you know, putting more asphalt in and widening roads and highways. The second point that we really gleaned from this was that they basically accept the assertion there's not enough money in the transportation system right now. They closely pair that with feelings that, well, that doesn't mean I'm ready to dig in my pocket. You know, they have a lot of concerns about what are we doing with the money that we have. So they don't really have a very good idea where their transportation funding comes from and how it's spent. To the degree that they did seem to get a recognition, it was like if there's a sign next to the project that basically outlined where the money was coming from, that was kind of helpful to them. But they don't. Most of them didn't even know how much their gas taxes were. They just know they didn't really, you know, necessarily like gas taxes. But they also accepted the basic fairness of gas tax in that it basically, you know, if you use the system more, you're going to buy more gasoline, therefore you're going to pay more. So it's not like they reject it as a viable way. It's just their general attitude about, you know, is it all being spent, you know, efficiently? Interestingly enough, when we gave them you know, over half basically came out of the gate feeling that there's not enough money in the system. But then we gave them a brief fact sheet, which is at the end of your handout, that listed a number of just basic facts about transportation funding. They read those, and then we basically asked them the same questions again, and more than 2/3 basically felt at that point that, well, you know, we really do have a problem. So then we went in kind of a problem-solving discussion mode with them. What's the best way to deal with this basic problem? And we identified several different ways that you could raise revenue for transportation. It could be an increase in the gas tax, an increase in the vehicle registration fee, an increase in the vehicle license fee. Interestingly, most folks didn't know the difference between the two. That had to be explained to them. And then when you explained it, they did recognize it. Well, yeah, my bill does have both of those line items every year. Truck weight fees was another thing that we looked at. And finally, in one session, at the last session, we touched on bonding as a tool as well. None of them really liked the idea of putting the whole solution on one of those funds. And the way that we came to that conclusion is we picked a number. We picked three. We basically showed them that there's in excess of $10 billion statewide and locally of deficits, needs every year, and we weren't going to try to solve all that in one big bite, but we picked a $3 billion number as what we felt was kind of arbitrary in some sense, but at least we felt that anything less than that probably isn't going to solve a lot. So we picked the lowest number we thought we could possibly really get our hands around. And we said, okay, here's $3 billion the legislature is looking at trying to come up with. And here's how much money each of these things generates. Then we started with the gas tax and said, well, 20 cents gas tax would give you about $3 billion a year. How many of you like that? Hardly anybody raised their hand. And then we just worked our way down. We got to around 8 to 10 cents. And when we got to where more than 2/3 of the people there said that they could go with that level, then we put it down. Then we went to the next funding source. And we worked our way through, basically starting at one level and working our way down until we got to what we thought was a 2/3 or so majority of the folks in the room. And interestingly enough, when we did that and we added up the amount that would be raised, we got a little bit over $3 billion. I don't know if that was a coincidence or what. They certainly weren't figuring it out on the fly, but it was an interesting study in their basic price sensitivity of what seemed to be fair. And so then we looked at, okay, well, since none of you really like the idea of putting it all in one source, what if we did a combination of things? And they like that idea for a number of reasons. Number one, they feel that each fee or tax kind of goes after a certain sector of user. And so if you hit more than one area, you're getting more people who use the system in one way or another. Just one example, there was one gentleman who managed several ranches down in Southern California. He said he uses a lot of gas, his whole crew does, but they don't really use the road system. I mean, it's basically running up and down roads that they maintain on the ranches. So he said, you know, it wouldn't really be fair to put it all on a gas tax for him because you know, he's not really causing that much stress to the system, but he would be asked to pay for a disproportionate amount. And so you had different examples like that. People look at the way the fee is structured and they automatically apply it to themselves and they start figuring out what seems to be fair. And so what we found that we came to, we gave them a representative solution, an up or down. We said, how about if we had something that came in at an 8 cent gas tax per gallon, a $25 increase on the vehicle registration fee, and a 0.25% increase on the value of the vehicle license fee. At the time, we didn't really deal with truck weight fees until a little bit later on, so we didn't have real good data on that. But just that as a sample package, not that we are saying this is the way to go, but basically 80% said this was a fair package. So what that really points out is not that particular solution is what you should be looking at, but it's the fundamental approach that identifying a range of different ways that people use the system and doing more incremental, modest increases spread out is something that if we frame it correctly and put the right accountability behind it and transparency behind it, I think you're going to be okay. I don't think you're going to be run out of town on a rail. The voters get this. It's all about trying to, if we could have this conversation with all the registered voters in California, we wouldn't have a problem. We would be able, they would pretty much all be on board. But we don't have that kind of resource. But I think that this is where the legislature, this is really a legislative issue, a legislative problem, because we have that opportunity to work with a group of legislators who already are involved in this kind of policy, and we can have that conversation. And I am confident with the governor's support and with support that we see in both houses that we can get somewhere with this year. And I do want to appreciate, just express my appreciation to you, Mr. Chair, for I know that you've done quite a bit of footwork on this already, and really appreciate what you're doing. We're encouraged this year. Thank you.
A lot of listening. Okay, Okay, we'll open up for questions. I have a question for you, Ann. You know, you dedicate your life in a public service in the transportation area, and how would you make the transportation delivery system more efficient so we can have more, what things do you think we should do to generate more confidence building that we need to get that support for the improving the transportation system in our state?
How many days do you have?
Well, you think we can do it, though?
I do think that we can do it, and I do think that there are professionals across the board in California in state government, local and regional government who have some really, really good ideas about how to streamline the process. And I think the challenge is that there are so many different layers of rules that we start running into competing priorities and competing interests, and it becomes really cumbersome to be able to deliver projects. So I think right out the gate, and certainly in this next legislative session, there's a real opportunity with the implementation of tolling legislation to allow us to do things in an innovative way, to do things that are different than we've done before. For example, last session with the authorization for the use of design build, that tool will enable us to shorten the time frame to deliver projects across the state once we start implementing the use of design build. So I think there's a lot of options and ideas out there, and it's going to be important. And we can all talk about ways to improve the process and make it more efficient, but until we start delivering to the public, so the public sees that we're making a difference, so that the public sees that it's not taking over a decade to deliver a project, that they see that we make a commitment to a project, we get it delivered, we get it open, and we move on to the next one. Until we start proving it to them, I don't think there's going to be a lot of credibility, so we have to stop talking about it, and we have to actually start doing it.